Hello everyone. Our today's lesson is going to be a very interesting poem uh, that is Keeping Quiet by Pablo Neruda. And this poem is basically from the NCERT textbook of class 12th, which is Vistas. And since I've chosen this poem, there's a very special reason why I have chosen this poem because the time in which we are living, this is a very difficult time as we all know. And we have been facing many challenges during this entire period of quarantine and self-isolation. And one thing that we have all come to realize that we all need a little bit of break and pause in our life. So this poem is particularly going to talk about that pause, that necessary pause that we all need in our lives from our busy schedule. How a little moment, you can say a little moment of keeping quiet can be beneficial for us as a person and as a human being in this world. So before we start this poem, I have a very beautiful quotation from a very important person. You must have heard about Blaise Pascal. So Pascal has said, all the men's miseries are a result of his inability to sit alone in a room quietly. Now see, this line holds very much importance while we are going to study this poem. He says that people's difficulties arise when they cannot sit alone in a room quietly. When we will lose this ability to sit alone, introspect, and think with ourselves, if we stop reasoning with ourselves, we will not be able to differentiate what good and bad we have been doing all this while and what changes we need to bring in our lives. So, this is what Blaise Pascal's quotation is about, that all our miseries will stop if we sit alone in a room and think about what we are going to do in our lives and what we have been doing all this while. So, with this quote, let us start with the poem Keeping Quiet by Pablo Neruda. Before starting the poem, let us first get a small brief introduction to the poet of the poem. And the poet who has written this poem is a very renowned figure in English literature. Pablo Neruda is the pen name of Chilean poet Neftali Ricardo Reyes Basualdo. So Neruda is not the original name, but it is a pen name adopted by the poet. And Neruda has been a very significant figure in the Chilean politics also. He has been the senator for Chilean Congress, and he has been a great advocate of world peace. And this is quite visible in his poetries also. The poem we are going to read uh, deals with a great amount of messages that generally relates to the world peace, harmony, and how people can coexist in this world. So for this particular feat, Neruda has won Nobel Prize for Literature in the year 1971. So he is a Nobel laureate, which is a very important thing that we should know about him. Pablo Neruda has won 1971 Nobel Prize in Literature, and that was the particular reason I told you. He has won this award because his poems and his works reflect a great deal about human coexistence and the reality in which we are all living. As I told you, he was a great advocate of nature, world peace, and fraternity. Now, he always told this in his works, in his poems, that the way we are dealing with humanity and the way we are living in it is totally wrong. Our perceptions of domination are very different from what we think. So, this particular thing is very deeply reflected in many of his works, and this particular poem that we are going to study is a great example of that, how he dealt with human emotions and how he explained that what wrong we do in our lives while dealing with it. So this is how we end up the poet introduction, and from that we move ahead to poem's introduction, what poem is going to give to us. The poem's introduction. Now before starting the poem, we need to keep some things in our minds. The first one is, the poem talks about a lot about achieving inner peace and world harmony just by keeping quiet. Now, the poem, when we are going to read the poem, we will understand that the poet is not demanding anything that is beyond our capacity to achieve what we have always wanted to. He is just saying that by keeping quiet for a moment, we can achieve whatever we want in our lives. So, the second part of the poem is about focusing on two very important words that Neruda focuses in the poem. First one is self-introspection, and self-introspection is ability to reason with our own self. When we can ask questions to ourselves and we can answer the questions that we have asked, that is called self introspection, and it only comes when we sit alone with ourselves in our own company. And when we retrospect, when we introspect that what we have done so far and how we are going to get ahead with our lives from here on. So this is what Neruda focuses in the poem. The first thing is self-introspection, that is ability to reason with our own self. The second one is mutual understanding. Now, according to Neruda, mutual understanding between the citizens of different countries or people having different race, religion, or culture is quite simple. It can be attained very simply because mutual understanding simply means understanding each other without the need of dialogue. You don't need to speak their language, you do not need to speak in their culture, you do not need to wear what they do, you do not need to follow their traditions, but still you can be able to understand what the person sitting in front of you is about to say or he wants to convey. You should understand what a person feels because of your actions, and you can adjust yourself according to it. So Neruda focuses that mutual understanding is very important in this world, to understand what a person wants and what are his needs, so people can adjust themselves according to it and our society can run harmony, with harmony and peace. So these are the two very important words that we are going to focus while studying this poem. First one is self introspection and second one is mutual understanding. So let us begin the poem. Let us see what the poem has to offer. So the poem starts with this first two lines. Now we will count to 12 and we will all keep still. Neruda starts with a very calm and composed manner, and he starts with that he will count up to 12. He will give us some time so that we can find that narrow escape from our busy lives. And then what happens when we are ready? We will all keep still. We will all stop working for a moment and we will keep still. We will keep silent. And this is how the world will start to relive. For once on the face of earth, let's not speak in any language. Let's stop for 1 second and not move our arms so much. What Neruda says, that let us stand on the face of earth. Let us face everyone that we were afraid to. Let us face people of different religions. Let us face people of different cultures. And let us not speak in any language. Let us not try to communicate by making them feel that we are dominated by our own language, because I believe, and as Neruda prophesizes, that languages create a kind of emphasis in the atmosphere, that you, when we start speaking in our own language in front of someone who is not quite able to understand what we are saying, it means that we generally want our language to dominate over them, and this can mean that we want to dominate our culture over them. And this is, I can understand, is the main problems, is the main region behind all the conflicts in this world. When you start to understand that you are dominating over someone else, if your religion dominates some other's religion, if your language dominates some other language, this is where all the conflicts start, because a common human tendency is to dominate over others. This is how human civilization has you can say progressed over time. So Neruda says that when we start to realize that this domination will not give us anything, then there will be a moment that we will keep silent, we will stop using our language, we will stop showing off our culture, and we will keep silent for a moment. Let us stop for 1 second and not move our arms so much. He just says in very simple words that for 1 second that we all need, we should stop doing our works, we should stop moving our arms so much. Whatever we were doing, whatever we were trying to do, means whatever we were trying to achieve in our lives, let us stop doing that for one moment and let us introspect how fast we were moving towards our target and whether we were moving towards wrong direction. So this was the first part of the poem where he says that let us stop dominating what we have and let us be, you can say, neutral towards people and stop doing our work whatever we were doing. In the second part of the poem, it would be an exotic moment without a rush, without engines. We would all be together in a sudden strangeness. Now, here Neruda says that this moment, when we achieve the moment of silence, when we stop doing what we were doing, this moment will be very exotic, very rare, and this will be the moment which will be without rush. Rush means uh, when we keep doing our work in a unchecked speed that is called a rush. So he says that when we stop doing whatever we were doing and our mind is free of all the tensions of the deadlines and time and the domination, as I said. So in that moment will be very rare and exotic. He says that moment will be without rush and without engines. All the machines will stop working on the all the factories will go idle for a moment. So that will be the moment of complete peace and silence. He says we would all be together in a sudden strangeness. He says that in that very moment, all the people beyond the boundaries from where we live and how we identify ourselves, everyone on this earth, despite of having their different identities, cultures, and religions, they will all be together in a sudden strangeness. Nobody will be different from everyone, because in silence, when we are not speaking in different languages, we are all same human beings having same type of features and same abilities the way God has given to us. So in that moment, we will all be together. Fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales. Now this particular paragraph, this place in the poem from where Neruda starts being a little bit metaphorical. This is the favorite part of my poem, because he tries to convey a lot of messages, how people have been doing business in this world since the human civilization has come. So Neruda says that fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales. People who had been harming other innocent animals and people for the sake of their business, they will stop doing it for a moment. Now, see, he started with a request that we should keep quiet for a moment, but later on, he explains what good things will happen if you stop for a moment. The first good thing that will happen is the fishermen, means the people who are very hardworking, as they think of themselves as they are very hardworking, they're doing very hard work for their own. But actually, what they are doing, they are harming the whales, those innocent fishes, those innocent people in this world who had no, you can say, malicious intentions in this world. They were harming them and then they were doing their business. So he says that for one moment, when they will stop working, when their hands will not work and the factories will stop, for that particular moment, he will stop harming those innocent whales, and maybe those whales can live one extra moment of their life. And the man gathering salt would look at his hurt hands. Now, what is the metaphor behind it? A man gathering salt. When a person who is working in a salt mine where the salt is extracted from seawater, what happens when people's hands get bruised and cut by the wounds, and as we can say, if we put salt on our bruises or our cuts, it starts burning, that burning sensation. So people who are working very hard without giving any attention to what pain they have been suffering behind it would stop for a moment and look at their hand, which has already been hurt and been burning, and he will look at his hand and he will think that what he was doing and what is the reason behind it. In this paragraph, those who prepare green wars, wars with gas, wars with fire, victory with no survivor. Now, these three lines hold very much importance to our history. It signifies that we have fought so many wars in an ambition that we could attain something, we could win boundaries, we could expand our lands. But what has happened in the end is a victory that no survivor was able to rejoice. Because when you fight a war, your own men die, and the others who could have been your brothers from other religion or other culture have died too, fighting for their lands. So he just says that we should stop at that moment. We should stop raging those wars. We should stop and check those warmongers who who kind of prepare these green wars and wars with gases and fire that harm people and create a victory without survivors. What he says, that people who had been engaged for long in these kind of wars, they would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers in the shade doing nothing. Now this line is very much touching, it is very metaphorical, and he says that all the soldiers who had been sent to borders to fight and kill their own brothers will, for that moment when we will start keeping silent and start keeping quiet, when we will stop doing what we were doing, all those people who had been trained to kill and trained to rage wars, they will stop at that moment. They will change their clothes that were already stained with blood of many innocents. They will put on some clean clothes. They will change their ways of living, and they will walk about with their brothers. Now these brothers can be their own brothers or brothers whom they would have killed if the war was going on. So Neruda says that if in that moment we stop, those soldiers will put on their clean clothes and walk about with their brothers in the shade doing nothing. They will not do anything. They will keep silent and enjoy that moment. Now see, at this point, as we can see in the poem, Neruda continuously keeps saying that we should keep quiet, we will stop doing, we should stop doing. But now he starts to change the point of entire thing that he was saying before in the poem. What he says that what I want should not be confused with total inactivity. He says that whatever I'm saying, whatever I'm telling you to do, does not mean that you should be totally inactive, that you should stop doing whatever productive you were doing. It does not mean that we should stop doing things in our life, but it means that life is what it is about. I want no trucks with death. He says that life is all about stopping for a moment and thinking that the thing that you are doing, is that right for you, and is that good for others that are living around you? Will that harm others, or will that be beneficial for the society? So he says that whatever he is saying to keep quiet, that does not mean that it is total inactivity. You should not stop doing everything, but you should think for a moment. That one moment you should stop, pause. You can say it does not mean stopping, it means pausing for a moment. So he says life is what it is about. He says life is all about pausing and thinking before doing anything. I want no trucks with death. He says that I do not want anyone to do such mistakes and then create people who are dead, and all the truck loaded with dead people without any reason. So he says that do not do that mistake, do not commit to that mistake. Stop for a moment and think whatever you are going to do. If I were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving. He says that you should not be single-minded for keeping your lives moving. You should not always think of moving ahead. These days people are so depressed that a new community of motivational speakers and a new community of people who are continuously telling things to you that you are meant to be at the top of the world, you can do anything, you can achieve anything. I personally believe that these prophecies are very wrong. The kind of philosophy they are feeding in your mind is actually very wrong. Sometimes you are not supposed to win. We are not supposed to win every time we practice. Sometimes you can do something entire life. You can keep preparing for an examination for the 20 or 30 years of your life, and you may end up not getting that job. You may end up not clearing that examination. So life is not about thinking of a dream and achieving it. There can be moments when you will not be able to achieve that dream. Sometimes it means that you are not made for that dream. Now if you start thinking that I want to become an IAS officer, or I want to become a scientist, but if you sometimes it happens that we get so mad, we get so obsessed with our ambitions that we do end up getting mad, and we sometimes we do not achieve it. So it doesn't mean that you did not work hard for it, but maybe it may be sometimes that you are not made for it, and it is quite possible, and it is quite okay to be not achieving something. So he says that if I were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving, we should not be very single-minded about keeping moving ahead in our lives. Sometimes a little bit of break, sometimes a little bit of pause will do the work for us, and for once could do nothing. He said that if I were not so single-minded about moving ahead, and could stop for one time and do nothing. Now see, this poem ends with a beautiful message, and this last paragraph of the poem says, perhaps a huge silence might interrupt this sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. The poet says that perhaps the silence that I'm talking about, this might interrupt the inner sadness inside you. Now he says the sadness Neruda is talking about, this sadness refers to the inner sadness that is inside of us. And this inner sadness is sometimes not visible to people, and you might not spot it because this entire generation has become very pretentious. The increasing use of social media, how people pretend to be happy on Facebook, Instagram. There are various apps you can open and you can see your friends smiling everywhere, traveling to places, smiling, enjoying with their friends, and you will sit at your home and you will think that how dream lives they are living in. But in reality, if you go and ask those people their honest opinions about how they feel about their lives, they will end up saying that they are not very happy. This entire thing they do, the entire traveling that they are doing, the entire things they are doing, it is just a defense mechanism against whatever they are facing in their lives. And sometimes, because we are unable to express that inner sadness in front of people around us, we end up threatening ourselves with death. We end up killing ourselves. We end up with suicidal thoughts, and which harms us very much. So poet says that might be if we try to keep that silence, we may be able to understand what things break us from inside. We might be able to interrupt the sadness inside of us and never understanding ourselves. The most important thing is to understand who we are and what are our limits. This is what Neruda says. He says we never understood ourselves. Sometimes people might be doing something, uh, for an example, you can see, I've seen many students who are preparing for some examination from so long. They have given 5 years, 7 years, and 10 years of their lives and still end up not clearing that examination. Now, what happens at that moment when students are unable to clear that examination? They start thinking that they do not have it in their potential, or they do not have it, that they can attain that feat, and they end up with suicidal thoughts. They start thinking that they should end their lives because they have not done anything in their life. Now, this is where all the problem starts, because people do not realize who they are, what are their limits, what are they made for, and what are the things they do not do, or they should not do. They should not start, because this is not what they are made for. This is not how their brain works. So it is quite important to understand ourselves, our position in this world, and for what things we are made. We might not be made for everything. If I at this moment start believing that I become a scientist, so I will become an actor, maybe I could. But if I cannot become, if I do not become an actor after some years, I should not blame on myself that I did not try. I tried, but I did not become an actor because there might be some problem, there might be some cosmic uh, allowance that did not allow me to do so, and I should not end up having suicidal thoughts. So this is what poet says, that if we keep that silence inside of us, we might be able to interrupt the sadness inside of us. And maybe if we come to understand who we are, we might not end up threatening ourselves. So, this is what he says in the last paragraph. And he says, perhaps the earth can teach us as when everything seems dead and later proves to be alive. He says that one of the greatest teachers can be the nature around us, the earth that is around us. He says that if we observe the nature closely, we will see that in one particular season, everything seems to be dead. For example, when the winter arrives, all the trees, all the new leaves from the trees will shed, and the tree will look barren, it will look dead. But if you wait, if you are patient enough, you will see that when the spring arrives after winter, all the dead trees will come back to life again, and everything will look like the life is back in the nature. So this is what Neruda says. After some time, if you're patient enough, you will find out that everything becomes okay, everything comes back to its position, and everything becomes alive. So this is how the poet ends the poem with his last lines. Now I will count up to 12, and you keep quiet and I will go. He says that he will count up to 12 and he will keep quiet. If you're ready now, if you are ready now after learning so many things and realizing so much things, then he will count up to 12 and you will start becoming quiet. So this is what the poem is. I hope you people have understood the poem well, and hoping for the positive response. Thank you.